Like knock this back a little bit. I'm gonna think about this, but back here is definitely filled in. I mean, the thing with war is that it tends to escalate, and it just keeps getting worse. That is the nature of war. I suspect a lot of like early warfare, or like early, what do you mean early? How early? There's you know, like going in, raiding people, stealing food and running away. This sort of thing happens in a lot of cultures early on. In China, during the so-called spring and autumn period, it was kind of similar. Again, early on, it was kind of similar. They called it spring and autumn because they would the wars would happen in spring and autumn. In summer, everybody was busy farming because these were not professional soldiers; they were basically farmers. And then in winter it was kind of like too cold to go out. Like you would lose more people to the cold than you do to the enemy, and it's not really worthwhile. So in spring and autumn they would go on campaigns to mess with each other, and especially in autumn you would again go to the other guy, take his food, eat his food while you're there, and then like when the food runs out you go away. I mean, you try to, you don't always succeed, of course. And like this would just go on for hundreds of years. Like people just like every year they would go out and see what they can steal from the other guy. And it was relatively stable in the sense that nobody did too much damage because they couldn't do too much damage. But they, you know, they had enough success that it was worthwhile to just keep trying. But again, you know, as time went by, people got better at raiding each other. And then things, you know, start getting ugly, right? Again, like the conquering cities, taking slaves, massacring the population, like that sort of stuff. Over time, that would happen more and more. And, yeah. And eventually they got so good at mass slaughter and slavery and all that sort of stuff that they formed a proper empire, right? So eventually the first actual Chinese empire, the Qin dynasty, not the Qin dynasty, yeah, the Qin dynasty, that's right. It basically grew out of that. It grew out of people gradually getting better at enslaving each other to the point where they could organize a stable, large-scale society, right? You can like mass mobilization of armies. Am I explaining this properly? Like they got better and better and better at organizing their armies until the scale of it grew enough that it turned from just like petty kingdoms, from like city-states into kingdoms into an empire. Basically requires larger and larger scale organization, right? Like you have like one city, like a confederation of cities, and then you have like a huge empire. It's just like logistics, communications, roads, organization, like a hierarchical structure, laws, all that sort of stuff. So like, how do you grow from, you know, cities just going next door and stealing their food into a large conquering empire? Blackstone? Blackstone. Deep slate? Let me just see what this stuff. I want a dark background. Behind stronghold. They look kind of the same, don't they? That's deep slate. Let's go for Blackstone. Blackstone has more contrast. Alright, so behind the word is Blackstone. Although having said that, curiously, the Greeks in the Peloponnesian War, the Greeks didn't really get better. Well, the Athenians didn't really get better at the empire thing. They kind of did for a while, and then they got greedy. It's strangely European, to be honest. Maybe it explains the European Union a little bit. How to explain? The Athenian Empire, they didn't see their allies as their own people. As time went on, they demanded more and more and more money from their so-called allies. And their allies would not be happy with this because they didn't have that much money, to be honest. They didn't really have that much money. Oh, I didn't want this. I want this to be mossy brick. Okay, let's change this back again. Well, maybe no. Let's have it one block further out. Like, they needed money to continue their war against Sparta, and they would like demand more and more money from their allies, and all the money was kept in Athens. In Athens, right? They would like every so often. Was it every year? But anyway, they would like demand tribute from their allies. Basically, protection money. Demand protection money from their allies, and they would presumably protect them against Sparta, but it didn't always work. They didn't always succeed in protecting their allies either. And so the allies got kind of unhappy with this every now and then, and every so often Sparta could leverage the fact that Athens wasn't doing such a great job to like flip one of their allies. And then Athens in response would like go and like sack their former allies and then enslave all the people and kill a lot of the people, massacre the population and enslave them. So Athens wasn't very good. They wasn't a very good ally, to be honest. They were kind of mean about it. Not actually the best people in the world. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that the Athenian Empire, they didn't see the other... They didn't see their allies as one of their own people, if that makes sense. They saw them as other people. They didn't see them as their own people. I'm just gonna fill this in and then figure out the staircase afterwards. Whereas, you know, if you want to build an empire, you at some point you have to stop seeing people as other. You have to kind of like build a new identity around the empire identity, right? Like when the Roman Empire, well, the Roman Republic At first it was like Romans, it was just Rome, and Rome would go and, you know, conquer its neighbors. It would go conquer Latium, and then it would go conquer the Etruscans up north, and then it would go down south, push into Sicily, and then so forth. And at some point, they decided to like give these conquered peoples Roman citizenship. Well, at least some of them. Some of them they would give Roman citizenship, others they would just enslave. I mean, it depends on whether they like them or not, I guess. But the important part is that as time went on, more and more people became quote-unquote Romans. Even though, you know, a lot of them never even went to Rome. Right? They were just like conquered provinces. But the identity of Rome was extended to these conquered peoples. And so Rome grew and grew and grew from one city into an empire eventually. And at least ostensibly, they were all Romans. And in doing so, you could maintain an empire. Like if all these people saw themselves as part of the same group, you know, you have a much easier time maintaining the empire. Whereas the Athenians really didn't do that. they really did not do that. Like all their allies were not Athenians. They were not Athenians, they were not treated as Athenians. And in fact there was quite a lot of resentment, to be honest. And so the empire was kind of dysfunctional. It didn't perform very well in a practical sense. Like there was a lot of disagreements. And it didn't last. Like the Athenians, eventually they lost to the Spartans. The Spartans were less idealistic, but they were more honest. Not to get too political, but the Athenians are kind of reminiscent of the Americans, and the Spartans are kind of reminiscent of the Chinese in the modern world, in today's world. Oh well, since I've started getting political. Which brings me back to like the Americans and the European Union. The European Union has trouble forming a European identity, and in fact a lot of politicians in each of the constituent states actively work against forming a European identity because they, you know, they play like a localist politics to get votes, right, from Eurosceptics. Like in order to maintain their popularity within their own country, they trash talk the European Union. And you know, like if the Europhiles, the people who believe in Europe, if they, you know, spend too much of their time talking about all the great things they're gonna do for other European countries, again, like the racist types and the xenophobic types would, you know, would vote them out, which is unfortunate. So, despite their grand ambitions at the start, it doesn't seem like there's much of a European identity I mean, there kind of is, but also there's quite a lot of resistance against it. And of course, because the Europeans are so principled in allowing free speech and freedom and all that, these voices are not silenced. Which, I mean, you can say, okay, but they shouldn't be silenced. That's fine. But it does mean that there'll always be difficulty building a European identity and actually turning the European Union into something more resilient, more robust, longer lasting. Alright, what happens here? Similar dynamic with the Americans. The Americans have two opposing parties, right? And on one side you have people who vote for people like Trump, and on the other side you have people who vote for people like Obama. And Obama wants to like reach out to allies, and you know, Biden as well. Biden basically follows Obama. Reach out to allies, build a coalition of the free world or whatever they want to call it. I mean, they don't want to, you know, build a greater America, a greater United States, the way Romans built a, you know, a greater Roman Empire. But nevertheless, they want to create this kind of identity of, you know, liberal democracies that, you know, they rally around, and you know, they feel like, oh, this is us. You know, we are the liberal democracies, mostly, you know, European or post-European. And then there's like guys like Trump who don't want to reach out to allies, and in fact went around demanding money from allies. Right, like demanding NATO pay more money, the same way Athens demanded her allies to pay more money in the war against Sparta. Right, same thing. I guess we'll see what happens in the long run. Boy, how do we get from building a fortress to talking about that? And we're talking about wars. We're talking about wars and defenses. And the way people wage war, and why, and how it actually does reflect. Ah, come on, bro, you walked into it. I need an entrance here somewhere. Let me just put these in first, and then I'll decide where the entrance is.